Hi, my name is Ayres, and I'm going to talk to you today about incorporating choice into your classroom. Now, if you're having a hard time engaging and motivating your students, incorporating choices into the curriculum is a great way to help your students not only take ownership in the academic tasks that you're presenting, but it's also a way for them to stay motivated and to help you feel like you're not having to fight them to stay engaged in a task and having to fight them to complete a task. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can incorporate choices in your classroom, which I'll go over with you, and there are also a lot of steps that you'll need to take to ensure that you're incorporating choices correctly in your room. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do is to determine the system of choice making that you'll be incorporating. You can incorporate different kinds of systems depending on how much control you want your students to have in their choice making and how much control you want to have in their choice making. It really depends on your classroom setup, the amount of control that you can allow your students to have. Now, you can give the students a lot of control in their choice making by having them completely have control of like what they want to do next. This can be, do you want to do spelling next or do you want to do math next? That gives them a lot of control throughout the day, and if you have a classroom where you're able to let your students choose what they want to do throughout the day, then that's a great idea. But you can also keep control of that choice making a little more by saying, it's time for spelling. Would you like to take your test or would you like to do this practice worksheet? So that's telling them that you're going to have to do a certain subject, but allowing them to choose which activity they'd like to do first. You can gain control a little bit more back with your choice making and control it a little further by saying, it's time for our spelling test. Would you like to take your spelling test on paper or would you like to take your spelling test on a whiteboard? So even though they're having to engage in the task that you've presented, they're getting a choice on how they'd like to complete it. So depending on how your classroom is set up is how you can determine how much control you can give your students. If you have a classroom where a lot of students are one-on-one, you could have them certainly choose what subject they'd like to do next. If most of your classes, it's time for spelling and your classroom is forced to be set up in that way where you have a large group and everyone needs to be doing spelling, then you could probably present them. You could control those choices a little more by having them choose the method they'd like to complete the task with or giving them a choice of which task they'd like to complete first. Now, you can also use choice making when dealing with behaviors. This can be done on the playground where, say that there's, 4 swings on the playground and there's a line to go on the swings next, and a child is having a meltdown because they want to go on the swing and they don't want to wait their turn. You can ask them, you can wait here. You can wait to have a swing or you can go on the slide right now. Just giving them like another option can a lot of times help them to not exhibit a lot of those inappropriate behaviors because you're giving them another option, another thing that they can do. Now, after you determine the system of your choice making, you'll need to determine how your students will choose, how they will make their choices. So depending on your students' function level is how this will be. If your students are high functioning, they could make a vocal choice. You could just ask them, do you want to take your spelling test or do you want to do your math worksheet? And if they're able to, without any kind of visual, they can just vocalize, I want to do my spelling test. You can certainly pair those vocalizations with visuals if needed. A picture of the spelling test, a picture of their math. and having them vocalize and choose what they'd like. Another way is you could certainly use sign language for our non-vocal students. You could use your symbols and have them point to what they'd like to do next, or vocalize what they'd like to do next if they're able to. And then certainly you can use a concrete example. You can actually physically give them two tasks like sorting and stringing beads, and have them physically choose between those two concrete activities what they'd like to do next. Now, one way that you can present these with your picture symbols is that you could make a choice board that have all the activities they need to complete before they can have a break. Say they need to do sort colors, they need to do a lacing card, and they need to write their numbers. So those 3 activities can be placed on your board, and they can choose what they'd like to do first. Once they complete that activity, then they choose from the 2 that are left. So then they'd choose the next one, complete that activity, the last one would go down, and they'd complete that activity. This way you're making sure that your students are completing every task that's being required of them, but they're getting to have a little bit more control in deciding what they'd like to do next. So with incorporating choice, you're determining your system, you are determining how they will make their choices. And the next thing you'll need to do is to make sure that your students are fluent in choice making. This may require you to work with students in appropriate choice making, making sure that they know that if they point to an object, that's what they're receiving. You could do this by working with reinforcers and things like that, having them practice pointing, having them practice vocalizing, having them practice using their pecs in order to determine what they want to do next, what they want next. So after you are sure that your students are fluent in choice making, you can begin your procedure of incorporating choice in the classroom. You'll want to make sure that you keep this up. If you allow your students to make choices and then you take that away, you're going to see an increase in that off-task behavior where they're not going to be as motivated. So you're going to want to make sure that you continue to use choice-making procedures to keep your students engaged. Now, some people say that having your students make their own choices in your classroom can help them to get out of things, and it can lead to some avoidance behavior. But really, if you are worried about that, then you can make sure that you are, when you're determining the system that you want to use to keep some control, you can do something like we talked about where they have 3 items on a board that they have to complete, but they're getting to choose the order of them. If they're taking their spelling test and you really want them to write it on paper because they can, and you can give them the choice of writing on paper or on a whiteboard, because what you're really assessing is if they know the words. It's not if they can write on paper or if they can write on a whiteboard. So just make sure that when you're giving them choices, remember what the goal of the task is. If the goal of the task is to write on paper, then obviously they have to write on paper. But if the goal of the task is to see if they know their spelling words, then it's okay if they write their spelling words on a whiteboard. So why should you incorporate choice in your classroom? I think that incorporating choices in your classroom is a great way to keep your students engaged and motivated. It helps give them control and makes it feel like you're not just handing out tasks. It makes them feel like they can control their environment a little more, which we know is important. Your students will be more engaged. Hopefully you'll see less off-task behavior from them because they'll be more interested in that task. And then lastly, choice making is a skill. It's important that we all know how to choose what we want and what we prefer. Having your students be able to choose what they want to do in the classroom can be carried over to at home. Having students choose, what chore they want to do next to help them encourage to help out in the house, and do some of those more functional skills, like what do you want to do next? Do you want to take your bath, or do you want to brush your teeth? It can be used in all different kinds of ways and in all different kinds of environments. So I hope that you'll incorporate choice in your classroom. Thank you very much.